nipple in the wound and wake you believe. I believe too that you are the river of light, who I love, that I cling to in the belly of the empty night. From the 31st floor of the simulation swarm, with a drone of fluorescence, flicker, fever, fill the form. With a warm dash, now I wanna touch like we never could before. I'd fly to you tomorrow, I'm not fighting in this war. I wanna drop my arms and take your arms and walk you to the shore.
Welcome to the 2-month review of the weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter 3%, the University of Rochester, and our fantastic Patreon supporters. I'm Chad Post from Open Letter Books, joined as always by Katie Whittemore, translator extraordinaire.
Hello.
And this is our podcast in which every week we take a book, break it down bit by bit, talk about it, analyze it, have fun, get into discussions, hopefully make fun of Ohio. That's a good standard to live by, and whatever. So this season we're doing 2 books, DML Eltit's Never Did the Fire and Daniel Hahn's Catching Fire, a translation diary that goes along with Never Did the Fire. And today we're up to page 136. This is the penultimate episode of this season, which I bring up for 2 reasons. One, finish the book for next week, and we're going to have some sort of resolution. Hopefully we'll be able to talk to Danny again as well to talk about that. Secondly, if you're a Patreon subscriber at the, I think, $10 level, you get a vote on the next book, and we will put forth a few suggestions within the Patreon, channel, Patreon page, that we're considering. And if you're part of that, you can vote on it. We'll discuss it, and we'll come up with whatever season 18 will be in the not too distant future. But today we're talking about Never Did the Fire. We're talking about Revolution. We're talking about Catching Fire. We're talking about translation. And Katie, what is your first impression of this part of the book?
Well, so which book? Where are we starting?
Let's start with DML's.
Okay. Yeah, I'm finding this to be I feel like I'm enjoying this a bit more because we're getting some action. That doesn't sound right. But
No. I mean, I'm glad that you're getting some action, Katie.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, speak for yourself, Katie.
Speak for yourself. Yeah, no, but I'm really, I think that I am enjoying getting some action from DML. What can I say? That's it. No, but I think that here, we're seeing the actual violence and and sort of even the emotional violence of what's occurred between them, when they find themselves in this same room. So now we're going back in the past, and we know that she's out. She's been probably captured, but has been released and is pregnant. I'm assuming, right? That's the condition that we're talking about.
I assume so too. Same.
Okay. Yeah, because I have a question about the timeline after that I want to talk about a little bit. But and then the man, the partner, the other person in the room was also captured and presumably tortured and underwent what one of these frentistas would have undergone. In terms of bodily torture, and he's released, and they find themselves face to face in this drinking tea, eating bread in this safe house, which is where they will ultimately stay until the present time of the book, where they still are in this new cell that's created that is them. So I think it's cool. I'm enjoying the acceleration a little bit of some of the action, and it gives us insight into why the present is such as it is, the present that they're living in. Yeah. So that's.
Do you like that part?
Yes.
Good.
The action.
The action. You need to get some of that. You need to get some of that hot Yamela action going on. Some of that fiery revolutionary rhetoric.
Exactly.
Little violence in the streets. So I've
Oh
become
my
obsessed.
God.
I've become re-obsessed with the SDS, the Weather Underground, and watched the trial of the Chicago 7 this past weekend, and wanted to talk about that a bit in relation to this book, because I think up until this moment, the revolutionary aspect of the setting, of the backdrop against which these two characters' trauma is being played out, in which we are watching like slowly just be like, essentially, like, I keep envisioning them being sort of like trapped in amber, like that they're unmoving, that they're sort of stuck in that place. The actual like revolutionary acts and discussions on it haven't really been part of this. And I think that's maybe, I think it's intentional on her part, but I think without that, it sort of doesn't, for me, it doesn't land as well until I got to this part with the violence, where I feel like now I'm getting more of a sense of what was at stake in their way, rather than the sort of like, we were a cell of 10, we analyzed, I wrote things, I would communist manifesto. Like the actuality of it wasn't really part of the text up until now, in my opinion. I don't know. Do you agree with that, or do you?
Yeah, no, I do agree, and I wonder if, to some degree, that is like the nature of the book in translation, or the nature of the book not in Chile, or not in a Latin American context. So I wonder if there's so much subtext that, say, a Chilean writer like Diamela, or Chilean readers, or even potentially other Latin American writers and readers might not need what we need in terms of context. And so we just have to, it's interesting, that's an experience that that I often have when I'm reading literature and translation, is like, there's just things that I have to wait to understand, which I might have sort of gotten or picked up on earlier.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think in that regard, this sort of burst of action helps situate us in the actual terror of the time. I think that maybe that's also part of this, is that we don't have a sense necessarily early on of the horror and the fear and that was happening. The disappearances of people, the torture, the deaths, the murders, and the absolute instability is not really present in this sort of like strange, slow, piece by piece unfolding that we have at the beginning of the book. So it does feel like sort of like things are like this, and then we're hitting an acceleration in the pace, where I'm at least getting a better sense of just how dangerous a situation they were living in, which would have absolutely conditioned, the emotional relationship that they have, like everything, all their relationships, the decision to have a child or not have a child, the way that you would interact with, trust or not trust people that were supposed to be part of, like, this impersonal but still highly integrated and enmeshed group of people. Like all those relationships would have been conditioned by those circumstances of like utter terror and mistrust as well.
Which we did talk about at the beginning of the podcast in relationship to Luis Goytisolo's Antagony, which still is not available, but is at the printer. Someday will be available for people to read. But there's a huge section about the Spanish anti-Franco revolutionary cells that mirrors this. And that's one of the things so how much do you know about Bernadine Dohrn?
Not very much.
Other underground. Okay.
No, I'm ready to be instructed.
That sounds.
I'm taking my orders, Cadre.
Sounds weird. So recently, last week, in fact, there's a new podcast called Mother Country Radicals that is by Bernadine Dohrn's son, Zaid, I think is how you pronounce his name. And it's basically chronicling like what happened, who his parents were. Bernadine Dohrn, who was the most dangerous woman, according to J. Edgar Hoover, the most dangerous woman in America. His dad is Bill Ayers, who caused a huge controversy I mean, he was part of the Weather Underground as well. And he actually wrote a book, a memoir about their times called Days of Rage, related to the protests that they helped organize because of the Chicago 7 trial that was going on, which I can get back to in a second. But in his biography, he was interviewed about it for the New York Times, and they asked him about like whether he regrets making bombs. And he said, no, I don't regret. We didn't do enough. Essentially, I don't have regrets for that. This becomes a big deal because one, that interview ran on September 11th, 2001. Two, he was one of the people that hosted a fundraiser for Obama when he was running for president against Hillary. And Hillary talked about how he was associating with terrorists and with like the radicals that tried to destroy our country. Now, the backdrop to it is fascinating, and it's fascinating kind of related to the conspiracy stuff that I was talking about last week, and the way in which the movement of like what a revolutionary movement was in 1968 and 69 and 70, early 70s, and how it divided and how it failed and how it was crushed is very, very, very similar to how things happen today in terms of police brutality and the general machinations of the machine. But secondly, it does sort of tie into this book really well. So the SDS, the Students for a Democratic Society, were primarily like an analyst, talky sort of revolution. Like, we got to get the proletariat on board, we'll rise up, everything will be fine, Mao is great, blah, blah, blah. And then at their big convention in 68, the Black Panthers were invited by Bernadine Dohrn, and they got up and were like, you can't fucking do this. Like, you have to like act. We have to have action. We have to like do things and bring the war home, because this is all like an anti-Vietnam protest as it starts, right? And bring the war home. And they also said a bunch of very negative things about women, that the women revolutionaries' place was to be prone within the revolution. It was very sexist and misogynistic, but it led to Bernadine Dohrn saying either we're with Black radicals and with action, or you're here like talking forever and nothing happens. And they had a walkout, and it split, and the split became the Weather Underground. So Bernadine Dohrn was the secretary, similar to the woman in this book, was the secretary for the SDS, for her cell, and then ends up arguing for action, which seems to be along the lines of what happens throughout this book, like where the female narrator is like, I urged us to like do something direct and have direct action. And they're like, you're a Stalinist, you're bad, you're a girl, you're this, you're that. So the Weather Underground ends up causing like they learn how to make explosives from reading a handbook, which is remarkably funny in certain ways. Blow up a police statue. They never injure anyone, which is one of the remarkable things. But they bomb the Capitol. They bomb the U.S. Capitol and cause $300,000 worth of damage. No injuries because they were warned ahead of time. They bomb the women's restroom in the Pentagon for the bombing of Hanoi. The Laos was for bombing of Laos was the one for the Capitol. They New York apartment by accident and kill 3 of their own members, which the number 3 in the desk show up here, and they go into hiding. And in hiding in their safe house, because Bernadine Dohrn's on the top 10 most wanted list as the most dangerous woman in America. They declare war on America. They send a tape, which she reads the speech of, saying, my name is Bernadine Dohrn, and we're declaring war on America and against the imperialist nature of America, blah, 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 blah. And we will take actions, and we will be in every university and every street, till things change. At the same time, Fred Hampton, one of the Black Panther leaders, is truly assassinated. They had infiltrated. One of the reasons that nobody ever got charged with anything from the Weather Underground in the end is that all the cases got overturned or dropped because the U.S. was spying and doing illegal wiretapping, illegal mail fraud, and essentially urging them to take these actions by implanting someone within their cell who is not trustworthy, who was encouraging them. And in fact, with Fred Hampton, supposedly the FBI agent who had infiltrated that Black Panther cell drugged him the night that the police came to raid him. So he was passed out. The police came in. A gun dropped on the floor and shot 1 bullet into the baseboard, and the police shot Fred Hampton 100 times and annihilated everything in this apartment. And that set off part of the Days of Rage and the sort of reaction to this as well, and to the Weather Underground's sort of activities of you can't just talk. you have to act. They have guns that they use, and we've got. So I'm sorry for talking so much and monologuing here, but give me one more second. So she goes into hiding. They go into hiding in their safe houses, and she gives birth to this kid at a time when they had no ways of going to the hospitals, no ways of like they couldn't get jobs because they couldn't use their social security number. They're living with aliases, and he grew up with this, not really knowing who
they
were. Okay, so the flip side of that is that at that point in time, that revolutionary thing, and one of the books I would recommend reading for TMR at some point in time is Vineland by Thomas Pynchon, because it covers this ground and this sense of like what was possible within this revolution socially and economically, and how the forces destroyed that and like destroyed people at all costs to maintain this phallic power. And so nowadays we have the quote unquote revolutionaries end up seeming like the Weathermen seem like the Capitol 6 insurrection people, January 6th insurrection people, right? Even though they're coming at it from two exact opposite poles, they end up, you could, amid like a Midwestern, someone in Ohio that is like listening to any of this would be like, they're kind of the same. They're all domestic terrorists. With totally different ends, but both like in that vein. So I just thought it was interesting listening to the podcast and watching the movie, The Trial of the Chicago 7 on Netflix is remarkable. The part where they gag and pined Bobby Seale in court, which really did happen, is one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen in a movie. It's intense. It's really intense and really good, and really does reframe like what was going on at that point in time, and speaks to this book in the sense that was it. Like the Chilean situation was different, obviously, in certain ways, but not really. Like even with the Weathermen, they're like, where did we turn to learn how to be radicals? Was Latin America. We turned to Cuba. We turned to the Viet Cong. We turned to like the Southern Cone to learn how to revolt and how to lead a revolution. And they truly believed that they were going to change America, the world. Everyone did. So that backdrop for this book is interesting then. It makes it really, like thinking about it through that lens altered the way I was thinking about this book, even prior to reading the chapter with the active violence. And that it does have, the stakes are much different. The sort of like what you were saying, like that would all be implied probably within the Chilean context. And it is even within our context because it's known, but it's not within the book. It's never emphasized enough that like it has been a topic of our discussion. And I kind of felt like this week, as I was reading all this stuff and thinking about this, that it kind of, maybe it should be, it really hones the sort of emotional part of this.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it helps provide context. It does provide the context for what the stakes are as well, and why. I mean, I wish that, I would love to have someone on at some point, or we should have had someone on at some point to talk a little bit about like trauma, like literary trauma studies, which is this field of literary, criticism and philosophy that is only growing. And I think, a lot has been written about memory in Latin American literature, trauma in Latin American literature, the post-dictatorship period. And I see like how we can use that frame for this book in such an interesting way to see, her use of Eltit's use of the repetition, of the slow feeding of information, of these ruptures and these breaks that we've gotten, like the breaks in the text that we've gotten up until this point. And now we have like this straight, and I wanted to ask you what you thought about this. So like this, can we look at this final sequence in this section?
Absolutely. Can I tell you that this book that I have on Eltit has a chapter called The Controlling Gaze in Las Vigilantes, and the subsection is called The Political. So this is Citizen versus Government.
Ah.
But I think there's some of the other books that I didn't grab here has a thing about trauma and an essay about her and about her writing about trauma. And
yeah.
So let's look at that last section though.
And I just want to point out too, like there's another bodily trauma that happens, which is the childbirth, and the child, the childbirth in general, and then childbirth under the circumstances in which, like, this boy is born.
Which was my interpretation as I was reading this, thinking back, I read this a couple of days ago, but that the woman kind of directed them, but that the guy was going to have to serve as the midwife for her. Okay. Yes. I did get that right.
Yes, that's what I got too. And then, so I think I had something off in the timeline. This is what I want to try to figure out. So, like, earlier in the book, when we're in the present moment and they're in the bed, and she's talking about, when we start to hear her talk about the boy and the breathing and the boy dying and deciding, like, we need to take him to the hospital, we're not going to take him to the hospital. So that all occurs like when the boy is like 2, I think, right?
Yeah.
So that's after, like, the dissolution of the cell. Like, that's not during the action, their political action. This is like when they are in hiding.
Yeah.
The 2 of them.
And they can't take him to the hospital because they're in hiding.
Because they don't like exist as regular citizens, right? So I had been reading it, like, assuming that was dragged, that occurred while the cell was still active early in the book. So it's interesting. So the fact that, like, the child is born when the cell is already defunct.
The deaths have happened. The
deaths have happened. The child is born, and they are creating this new life, this new cell within these 4 walls or whatever. Just the 2 of them, and the child. The child dies, and then it's just the 2 of them.
So here's the
supposedly.
Here's the part about that really quick. It's on page 109, the first part that we were reading. I had fallen already, trapped like a wild beast or circus animal, right in the middle of the public highway, surrounded and captured. And later you would fall. A ruthless sum, the complete cell, all 10. 7 of us survived, 3 dead. The 3 dead are here, upright, ornamental. They sparkle in the darkness. Before I had come out, you would fall. 4 months of you neither alive nor dead. Finally, we had to meet again. We did so ensnared in acute bewilderment. My condition obliged you to suspend your pain, your offense, the sum total of humiliations, the terror. So my interpretation is that there was an action. The cell, 3 of the people were killed. All 7 of them, the cell dissolved, but she was captured. He was later captured, maybe not at this event. Then for 4 months, they don't know. She doesn't know.
If they're alive or dead.
So they come back and reunited, and she's like nearing birth giving.
Right.
Okay. And then they have the child. Then 2 years later, the child dies. They can't go to the hospital. It has a fever, burns up, catches fire.
So this is all right. So the sequence that begins on with the robberies, right, and the sirens, and this violent bus ride. So I want to talk about this a little bit because it's complex. So it looks like, she has been warned, like, you must not leave. You cannot go anywhere. You must not leave this house, this room, right? Basically. And it looks like on page 130, what happens? Like, she does leave. The guy falls asleep and she leaves. And she says, all right, I was an analyst. I was ready to give up each and every condition and the boy in me, the captivity, the boy and me, a beautiful or glorious boy who was already walking and beginning to express his first words, some minimal, narrow words, my boy, who after 2 years between some powerful death rattles he was not going to survive. I can't say anything. I shouldn't. After a century, I watch you now asleep or awake, thinking with no horizon stretched out on the bed. The bed and you, that's the agreement, the sheets and my pillow. The whole century, the 1,000 collapsed years. There you remain in the room, curled up with your cranium, your skull, between the pillow and the sheet, lying there while I go out and walk unhesitatingly along the straight line of the pavement. I arrive at the bus stop, and when the time comes, I briskly climb aboard the local bus. So
I thought that this is
the present?
The present.
Okay. All right, good.
That she's like, and then the question that I had about that related to the rest of this that I was confused by, and then maybe you can straighten out. So my assumption was that, so she's counting back the boy. She remembers the boy. He was sick off and on, death rattle. He's not going to make it. He dies. Then nowadays she leaves to go work for obviously, I mean, this is very similar again to the Weather Underground stuff. Like Bill Ayers worked as like a kindergarten teacher essentially, because you didn't have to have a social security number and was paid in cash, like at a daycare. So she's taking care of people. Yeah, he was like teaching kids how to love and like be good people instead of he's like, I think one of his sayings was that kids are just smaller people, something to that effect. Kids are just smaller people. But so she goes to see this woman who she's been working with or whatever. Now the next part, beside my window, the sirens howl. I understand that further off in the next neighborhood, a shooting has occurred, a bank robbery. One of the bullets was a direct hit on the security guard, a man of about 30 in his blue uniform, dark skinned, but no, not slim. That's in the present too, correct?
Right.
Okay. And then the woman is the woman she's going to see, right?
Okay, hold on one second, because I am confused here.
Okay.
Death, blah, blah, blah. Okay, amid a minor or almost derisory or anodyne agony, the guard is dying, and the woman dies too, killed by her stupid hunger for the limelight. She dies irreversibly, strewn slowly across the floor. She's dying from 2-3 well-aimed shots to the head. She dies and she dies as though she were the only creature in the entire universe. I think this is the past.
Oh.
Or no, I don't know. Like, who's the woman?
Who is the woman?
Wait. So she's agonized. Okay, one second. This public spectacle, this is at the bottom of 131. The public spectacle of this woman of how old? Around 40, 45. What does it matter? A uniformed executive.
So I think that,
okay, that's in the present
this
too.
is the woman from the bank. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like a bank teller or whatever. And that's what the limelight thing is like trying to prevent the robbery, like putting yourself in. And so the next part, like nervous when faced with the robbery, who didn't know how or couldn't withdraw or didn't want to keep out what was happening, let alone do without screaming. It didn't forgo insults either. She just didn't hide her haughty for the robbers until 2 or 3 bullets brought her down. Okay,
got it.
So that's in the present.
Yep.
So the violence, so it's interesting because the violence of the actions that they take are still only happen off screen.
Right.
In that one
so
part.
all of this it's like all of this, this whole sequence is like the violence in the present that is just like proliferates. It's like, and she's imagining it, you know, I mean, except for maybe this.
I think she hears the sirens. I think she hears the sirens.
And she hears the sirens and she says, okay. And then 2 blocks or 5 blocks later, you know, this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then it comes down to, I mean, it's really specific. It's, the 55-year-old industrial engineer, 50-year-old male.
I mean, it's just that like, the world is surrounded and steeped in violence.
Yeah.
Like in random violence, like a bank robbery, random act of violence towards these people. Then this kid, he grabs the recurrent and inevitable young man will straight away, without hesitating, without the least glimmer of weakness, with astonishing precision, shatter the car's windscreen.
Mm-hmm.
I say windshield. He will do it with all the power of his musculature transferred into the stone. A stone he is holding with a vigor that his deep-seated resentment bestows on him. One of the Weather Underground idols was this kid who derailed the train by putting a brick on the train track.
Oh my God.
And that stone rang true with that for me too. I'm seeing like so many, it's like one of those like coincidental like Bader Meinhof situations.
Okay, this is really interesting. Okay, this is where I was reading quickly and got confused. Okay. So as like we're coming to an end of the sequence on 135, she gets, she's like gone through these like blocks by blocks describing these different scenes, acts of violence or crime. And she says, but everything has normalized now. It looks for a moment like a city from another century or another millennium, mute and opaque. But at the street right opposite the bus route, in a remote house that some might even consider peripheral, the pregnant woman cannot withstand the first blow to her head and falls to the kitchen floor. The blow to her head dizzies her, its force and the dry, bony sound. She understands that she ought to get up onto her 2 feet and try to run away. Do it right now, stand up. But at the same time, she knows the blow will fall again and again, chaotically on her body, her head, her ribs, her leg, a foot, her arm. It broke both her hands. This time she really is going to be killed. A crime of passion. Another one. Now we switch. my own, on this exact day, when no more than 7 minutes have gone by, she will be lifeless on the kitchen floor. She knows it. She knows she has these minutes of life. It's this awful, awful, awful drawn out
this is
sequence. I won't read the whole thing, obviously, but
there's one line, the last thing that woman managed to think, perhaps it was no more than a word, was a command. Stop. Then nothing. Everything ceased, meaning it was gone.
Yeah. And then she switches. It's like the bone in the cheek brings her back to the room and back to the partner. You arrived with your ill-treated bone. Like she describes it, like it looks like, like in the torture or whatever, they had broken, a bone in his face. Sat down in the chair. After months, I sat down to the table, the same one we have now, stretched between us. Then you lay down on my bed and fell asleep. Now, as gunshots echo across the city, you will be sunk into the bed. Okay, so now we're back in the present, the usual one, just as I get off the bus, and as I walk as straight as I can, etc., etc. Okay, nor does my shoulder, things don't hurt, while I attempt on a perfectly ordinary walk to look like I'm somebody I know, someone I control. But I have doubts and I waver, astonished at the very possibility of being a woman I know and control.
Yeah, if I were editing this book as an original, I would have moved this chapter much earlier.
Yeah.
I think it should be about a third of the way in.
Yeah.
Rather than, like the last bit here.
I mean, it answers a lot of questions, or not even answers them, but just provides like a bit more solidity.
The context.
And the context, but I think that's maybe that's the point. Is there? Well, two things could be happening. One is that it's destabilizing to not have the context, and that could be perfectly intentional.
I think it's intentional. I don't know that it works.
Yeah,
those are two different things.
Yep, exactly. And I also think that there might be more context in the original, like for readers of the original. Like if she were writing, I don't know, but I mean, I assume she's not writing for a Chilean context, but that is the context. Yeah, I mean, I really like this part. This helps explain to me too, like, why is she going to these people's houses? I had I thought I was waiting for some like big reveal that like one of them was like a, I don't know. I didn't know who they were going to be, but it's really just that she has to be paid under the table, like as, a white
and
rose
they're just living in this safe house. I mean, she keeps saying 100 years, 1,000 years. It's been this shit. But like, if you're in one room, in one house, living underground amid like crazy violence, after you had been assaulted by police and tortured by the police, as we can assume or read out of this without much hesitation, it would seem like 100 years. It could be a couple months after the death of the child, and you wouldn't necessarily know.
I mean, yes, except for like if she's saying at the beginning when she talks about like, well, this century that is no longer ours, like, right. So I'm reading that from the beginning is that the present is in the 21st century.
Interesting, because I'm thinking like another way to read that would be to use the Pynchon sort of idea that
like the ideological
idea that, like, or the historical ideological idea that in the 60s, 70s, there was a moment where things could have been different. And that the century is no longer theirs. That was crushed, and the century is no longer theirs, even last century. Like, it's crazy that like how much dies down during the 80s. Like, I can't get past this. Like, I keep thinking about it and thinking about like I grew up in the 80s, and in college there was still like remnants of like SDS Marxist sort of like, we could change the world, we can make the world a better place sort of ideas, but it was really deadened down. And I think it was
big time. I mean, it was like, Reagan, it was Reaganomics, and it was Coca-Cola and
CIA and FBI.
And then in the 90s, it's Clinton, and it's
sex impeachments. And like we get distracted. And then we get distracted. And that's like the Neil Postman amusing ourselves to death and Brave New World theory of that this everything became entertainment. That we'd stop paying attention to like the struggles, the need for social justice and equality in various ways. And instead we're just like watching an impeachment trial because someone shoved a cigar up someone's crotch. Like, it's a crazy world to go from one to the other. You've got like people being slaughtered, and then you have like this kind of almost 3-ring circus in which, to be honest, like the Monica Lewinsky was so mistreated in that whole thing. And I know that you watched the same show that I did, the American Crime thing about it, which was like really harrowing in various ways. And I don't want to get into that, but like the idea that like we start just becoming more and more amused by stuff. We get the cable TV, we get the internet, we get the proliferation. There's no more, after the 90s, everything, that's the last time that media wasn't, is it disintermediated, or was when everyone watched the same thing? We all knew the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and it's, I mean, like, I feel like we talked about this too with Bolaño last season too, just, you know, the idea of like the disintegration and the fracturing of the big narratives that people were able to sort of to organize around on the right or on the left, and that became like sort of an impossibility to enunciate really an ideology in that same way, and to die for an ideology in that same way. And I wonder, you know, like our current moment, there seems to be like, you know, a return to, I don't know, like, I don't know. I have the sense that people, I mean, I'm thinking about Europe too, and I'm thinking mostly about the right in this case. And I think what's really scary personally, politically, is that the right it seems that proponents of the right are finding it a lot easier to organize around a central narrative.
Create a general big narrative.
And the left is not. And
Definitely.
So so in terms of, like, have we seen a left since the late 1960s that has been viable in terms of actual change, and, you know, being prepared to violently usher it in. So, but in terms of this book, and I think what Eltit is doing that's so interesting is that impossibility. I mean, for me, this is the reading I'm giving it to. Like that impossibility of I guess, like, bodily integrity on a social and political level, like, of, you know, the maintaining the integrity and the health of a cell, of a society, of a humanity, is also
of a child.
Is then brought down onto this really, really personal level, which is the most personal level, I think, for me anyway, and that is of, you know, of your body, the female body, the womb, the child. And I think the way that these things are mapping on each other is really fascinating, and that the trauma is double. And so what she's experiencing, or maybe it's more than double, it has proliferated in this other way, in that, you know, what she's reliving is not only, you know, which we don't, I mean, here's the thing too that's interesting, is that, like, the main trauma that we see cropping up is the death of the child, right? However, there are these other remnants that point to this political trauma that she experienced, right? Which was political in a political context, but which was also, you know, a physical trauma in the deaths of, you know, these ghostly figures that live in the room with them, which are like, you know, the three comrades that are standing there and that are watching from the corner of the room, you know, like that present is still there. In the same way that, like, the instances of, it's like a record skipping, like.
There's also, like, one thing to tie back into what you mentioned at the end of last week, and to really bridge this, is there's a lot of breaking of bones. And like you're saying, like, the sort of dissolution of things too. There is, like, the physical, the wrist hurts, the bones break. That ending part that you read, there's a bunch of fractured cheekbone. There's I forget, I was marking a bunch of them last night.
And there's and about calcification too, like,
yes,
things becoming rigid and stony and set in place. What?
The stone breaking the windshield. And to tie this all
Right.
together, the reason Brian's not here is because his daughter broke her arm.
So it was foretold.
It was
Um,
what's the word that he struggles with? Not predestined. Shoot, what was it?
where the Brian struggles with?
Section. No, in Danny's section where it's like not foretold, not like presaged, but he struggles with the word. I'll find it in a second.
So as you're looking, I want to just highlight this interesting thing, this on 135 that Diamela does that I think is really cool. This time she really is going to be killed. A crime of passion. Another one, my own.
That one's interesting. I don't know what
and
that.
I want to know what this. Yeah. And like what is this other crime of passion? Her own. But I think calling it the crime of passion, like she's saying, she's in this house, she's pregnant, this woman in the present that's being killed. It's a crime of passion. And then we have this really dispassionate scene in some ways between the two of them when the partner finds that she's so heavily pregnant. Do you think Jimena was the woman that he was dancing with? That
oh, right. Yeah.
Like, because now Jimena is gonna she's the only one who's taking care of her. She found in the house. There's they're sort of bound up in this way, but we know that at one point he was dancing with someone else. So I wonder if there'll be something more with Jimena.
Yeah, I mean things are really, really speeding up here.
Yeah.
We have a few pages left, but nevertheless. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, I can't find it now, but it was something. Oh, here it is. Purpose was Destino.
Oh yeah.
Destination, and then he chose purpose for that. It was destined. Yeah. Was the joke I could have made about Brian's daughter's.
Yes.
But I couldn't get there because I'm an idiot, and and that's what that is. So I have one specific question for you.
Okay.
That is mainly just giving you a softball to talk about one specific translation of yours.
Okay.
So on page 159, he says he's struggling with a strange reference to some sort of judge in a legal system I can't quite understand in relation to car accidents. The phrase investigatory magistrate came up. And this is something that comes up in Mothers Don't. And it came up in his earlier, and I meant to ask you about it at that time, but I don't think you were on the podcast. So I wanted you to talk about that for a second, because that is an interesting trouble, contextual trouble.
Yeah. I think I translated it as the investigating judge. And so I guess
it was investigating attorney, wasn't it? Oh no, maybe it was judge.
No, it's the judge.
Yeah.
Because it's el juez de instrucción here in Spain. So, and I'm no Spanish legal scholar, but I did have to do a little brushing up just in order to.
I'll play one on this podcast.
Yeah. So in this system for certain types of crimes, there's an investigating judge who oversees the police investigation of a crime, and then that judge will also sort of, I guess, sit in judgment of the case, or if at least if sort of what the grand jury situation would be like. The where do they do that? When they're going to see if there's enough evidence to go to court or to press charges or whatever. So the investigating judge has a role in the actual instructs the police on their investigation, which was interesting. Yeah, so Mothers Don't coming out in July.
There's also another part to it, though, in Mothers Don't, which also ran into the same sort of weird problem where you had the thing where it could have been a civil case, that it was a criminal case. Against this woman who drowns her 2 children, but there is in Spain the option of a citizen suing her for having killed her children and having committed this act. And that was something else that was wait, what?
Yeah.
And had to deal with that in terms of building the right context for a legal system within a work of fiction is an interesting translation challenge, I think.
Yeah. I really enjoyed reading this section of Danny's book too, where he teases out a little bit some of these word level tweaks and changes. And I can't find, I was reading it last night and when I fell asleep, and now I can't find the book. So I don't know where it is. But I can speak to what I remember underlining and writing in the margins about. But yeah, like the process of the revision process, I think this is a very interesting part of translation and of learning about what other translators do and how they do it. And so, with this book is not a long book. So, he describes by the end of the week or however many days he's going to have done one reading and then another reading and then another reading. And that you get down to sort of like the nitty gritty of I like how he talked about how this part of the process is about how you want the reader to be led through the text. In a sense, what? You're smiling? Well, for those of you that are joining us on the podcast, Chad is smiling on the video cast. So,
because on the first page, I was looking to see what other things I noted. And on page 131, I circled linger and put Katie will sing the Cranberries.
I will not. I have been not after the last time I tried to sing on this podcast. You're going to sing We Don't Talk About Bruno, right?
We don't talk about Lucho?
We don't talk about Lucho.
Which I still think is such a missed opportunity. Such a missed opportunity. At page 152, we did not talk about Lucho. Damn close.
It's so good. It's so good. It's so good. Yeah. So the revision. So this aspect of the process is really interesting to kind of have a little bit of a window into it. And it makes me think about I don't know, I guess it's like, and you would know more about this being an editor and a publisher and having worked with a lot of people through their revisions. I mean, I only have the experience of doing my own, and now I'm having this little window into what Danny does. But would you be interested in talking at all about from an editor's perspective, how you view Danny's process from what you've read, how what your experience has been working with translators at this level?
I think
the process.
There's one note that he makes in here that I think ties into that. I think it's a footnote, in which it says at a later stage in the process, on 154, Bill, the book's editor, would refer to one sentence as sounding like a badly tuned radio, which is mine is always a camera that's
out of focus.
Out of focus. Same thing, a lot to be fixed at this stage. Sentences, are sort of there, blah, 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 blah. So I think that the situation with Danny, what I think is interesting about this and about the process of publishing these sort of books, is that his representation here and his faithfulness is to creating Diamella's text. And so a lot of his choices that are driving are based on sticking with this original. And he references several times, not getting too far, not doing what he thinks it should be, not adding the commas where there should be commas, not changing
the contractions,
not making sure it doesn't sound like him. And I think that an editor does have the right, because I don't know that these books are ever fucking edited in their original language. And I don't know that the books are as good as they can be given that premise. So I think that the editor of the translation has the opportunity to do what the translator in his case is hesitant to do. And I've encouraged you at times to do that and to go forward and make those sort of changes for a variety of reasons. The Last Words on Earth is a very particular instance in which we've talked about it on this podcast and fits into that, but even within other things. But I do think that that at times there's an author's intent, but an author's intent doesn't make it absolutely right. There's a big division between Germanic, the relationship of writers within their Germanic situation in which genius comes down, is bestowed upon them. And their words are, magic, the Benjamin way of talking about translation of this mystical, godlike substance that flows through you. And then there's the side of the practicality of the more Western, more American side of things of everything is a building block that can be shifted around to make it more of a better structure, a better building, a better painting, a better whatever. And that manipulation can come from outside. So you see Gordon Lish rewriting Raymond Carver and creating Raymond Carver through his editing of that prose. And I think that that's a much more common sort of American individualistic, exceptionalist sort of ideal.
Interventionist.
Interventionist.
Yeah.
Versus the other. But I fall more towards that side, not entirely. Like, I don't rewrite a lot of stuff, but I do think that in the end, I don't take the original as something that is blessed in that way, or that is sacred. Especially when it comes to contemporary literature. It would be different if it were like something that were canonized in various ways. Contemporary literature, it's like, I mean, I know I've talked to people, so many authors who are like, nobody's ever read, my editor just printed it. Like, nobody made suggestions. And like, I feel like that opens up a gap in which you can have a more interventionist situation, maybe not rewriting it into your own voice, maybe not rewriting it into what works for the American marketplace, but at least not taking it as sacred.
That's really interesting.
But related to that, he positions his role on, like, I would curious about you, to throw this back to you, like what you see your role is like, do you do what you're doing in relation to the quote, not sacredness, but like in honor of
viability,
and then can say to someone else, to a third party, okay, here's the things that I notice in my interpretation of this, or in my activity of translating this led to this interpretation. Here are situations in which I think maybe you might want to weigh in and have some decision, like passing the buck, but making it aware, making the editor aware. Or where do you fall into this?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Because, so I'll stick with the translator. I'll stick with, like, in our case, like an Anglophone translator and an editor. And I think, what we have to draw attention to also is that is an act of power and hubris to some degree, right? And so I think just, we have to acknowledge that, to say, like, that I can make this better. I don't think that isn't true in some cases, especially where, as you say, you have writers who are edited, let's say, with a very, very light touch in the original, and each sort of, like, publishing sphere in the various countries have their own ways of doing things, or not. And so so sometimes the work can really, really benefit from that type of sort of intense scrutiny that is constructive, and in sort of the spirit of really making the book the best it can be. That, I think, does have to be between the Anglophone editor, translator, and the original author. That has to be a partnership. Like, I don't think that's something that can be performed upon, or it shouldn't be performed upon a text without, like, the, permission or participation or collaboration of the original writer, if, he, she, or they are living.
Unless they're an asshole.
What's that?
Unless they're an asshole.
Unless they're an asshole, and then, all bets are off, right?
Yep.
And for me, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there have been times where, I'm absolutely, like, I think that the editor luckily can sort of be the scapegoat in a lot of cases for the translator. Like, in my case with you, like, I've been able to say, I guess you just sort of it does feel not like getting permission, but sort of like getting, you have backup in that other pair of eyes, that other set of eyes reading something that might work sort of less fluidly or less well, and knowing that it could be more impactful, it could sing in a different way, the image could be sharper or brighter, right? Or the sound could be in tune, but that it's going to mean that you have to make some pretty, we have to, like, go further on the dial, right? On the original.
Creative acts of interpretation.
Yeah. And I remember talking with Laura Moreno for an interview that she and I did together, just a conversation we had on the occasion of the publication of Wolfskin by Structo Press in the UK in the winter. And the interview hasn't been published yet, but I think they'll publish it in the summer when Open Letter publishes Wolfskin in the US. But something that we talked about was like, I mean, the authors that I've worked with so far have been really hands-off in terms of like, I mean, for the most part, many of the writers I work with don't feel they have the command of English where they would want to be part of like the translation process, and that they trust me. And most importantly, and this was the thing that Laura said that I thought was really cool, was like that she trusts me as a reader. And that for her is like the paramount thing, is that she trusts the way that I read her.
Right.
And the care that I took with reading her work and understanding her project as a writer. And I thought that was really interesting, because to some degree, I mean, her point was like, I already wrote my book. I wrote a book, and now you're writing another book. And that's kind of your job, is what she was saying. Like, she was being a little facetious, but basically she was like, I wrote my book, now you go write your book. Meaning, you go write Wolfskin. I wrote Piel de Lobo.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, my personal philosophy is to be quite flexible in that way, because I do think that you can be very, very faithful to a text, and have it in some ways look really quite different on a sentence level from the original, which scares me. Like, I'm scared to, say this and to admit it. Like, but I loved looking at I loved looking at the original. And since I read Spanish, it was really cool to be able to compare. And so I think I would like to do something like that with one of my own translations, like annotate kind of the way he did, where you have the original and then like a first pass, second pass, third pass, and you keep moving through, and then see ultimately what you end up with, which is what gets published. Like the iterations between the original and then the first draft, and then what is finally published can be very varied, and I think that was really cool. And this was to be able to see a progression. Yeah. It was cool to see someone else's progression for sure.
Absolutely. That's my favorite part so far I mean, I like all of it, but I like that quite a bit too. So it's very specific. Should probably wrap up here. Do you have a favorite line? You don't talk about Lucho? Dude, I almost got you.
I'm not going to sing it, but I'll hum it. And now we'll have that in our heads.
Gotta have linger. Gotta linger. Linger is 100% going to be the music.
There's no way I'm singing the Cranberries. I don't have. It's Dolores, right? Wasn't it Dolores? Was Dolores.
R.I.P.
Well, okay. I don't really have a favorite line. There's nothing really in here that was. Let me see.
Oh, I do have one other question for you that is related to Danny's book before we go on here or finish up. Is he references the thing about everything being about bread being difficult, and I didn't know that I ever quite understand. Maybe we can talk about this next week. I'll pull out the references, but he says it a few times in his diary about bread.
Can you read that? Can you read? I don't have the book in front of me.
You find a line, I'll find that.
Okay, I do have my line. It's on page 111. Yeah, I really loved this. This for me is like, for me personally, in my reading of this book, it's key. Okay, so, all right, 111, she says, yes, isn't that right? Okay, so she's talking about a self-absorbed lucidity, an irrefutable mise-en-scène, a trajectory that contains 1,000 years, 100 of history. Yes, isn't that right? But never, ever did I think about the autonomous functioning of the body, its cyclical surprise, and its calamity. Never in your astonished or disgusted face, yours, in the hours of a tragic reunion, my tragic but fleeting survival. I think that's really beautiful and terrible all at once. And then there's Lucho. Of whom we shall not speak.
Page 160, 12. As I mentioned a few weeks ago, the word bread was causing me trouble. Fortunately, I happened to mention this the other day to my friend James, who used to live in Chile, and after a couple of minutes on Google Images, I think he may have solved my problem. Okay.
I mean, it must be some sort of Chilean word for bread, or like a kind of bread, like a panecillo, or in Spanish, or like in Spain, like a.
In this part of it, if it said the Spanish word, that would make more sense to me. The fact that it just says,
but it must be in another entry. I mean, we must have missed it. Well, you just said that though, like.
It said bread the earlier time too.
Oh, there's no.
Page 128. Bread is, for a seemingly simple noun, surprisingly hard to translate. So I just wondered if that was like I mean, I get where you're coming from if it's like a specific word within the Chilean context. That stood out to me twice, and I wondered if there was something else about bread within Spanish that's like particularly
not that I can think of.
Have to think about. I would never know. You'd be like, oh no, yeah, that's a common problem. We talk about that all the time in translation.
No,
bread.
No, not that I can think of.
Oh God.
So we finish next week is the last episode.
Next week is the last episode. So we finished both books through page like whatever it is, 161 maybe 156 in the actual book, and then Danny's book goes up to 202, and then there's like a index, but the index is like, kind of a joke, but
okay.
I mean, kind of useful, but you're not going to read it. Nobody reads the index. Anyway, so yeah, that'll be it. So if you like what you hear, you can rate us, review us on iTunes, wherever you get your podcast. Please join our Patreon. We thank you for your support. And we will be back next week for the conclusion of Things Catching on Fire.
Bye.
Maybe you'll get some more action, Kate.
I remember building an energy shield in your room like a temple. Swallows in the windless field, very thin, with your mother. Tall as a pale green tree, very wild, bright as winter. Rising with a prism key, and a child to deliver. Taken with the blood